Um, because this is a new concept, this is a new idea, and we're proposing to evaluate it for the first time here, not here physically, but in fact it's an issue. What is PolySocial reality? I will explain it a bit, but the simple explanation is, well, it's what we're participating in here. We're in a physical, social situation, but we're doing Twitter, we're doing Facebook, and email at the same time, and all of these things. Two people walking down the street, maybe texting somebody else. They're simultaneously in physical, social situation, and in a digital, shall we say, social situation. That's the simple explanation. I'll go into some more detail. Some background first, how this all came about. I got a new job. It's my background, first degree is in anthropology, and then a master's degree in interactive telecommunications, and then PhD in education. So I'm a kind of social scientist with some technical ability. Sally and Michael, my co-authors on this, are anthropologists, and Michael in particular is very strong technically and mathematically and does data visualizations all the time. My background in design as well as anthropology. So I started working at the Royal College of Art in London to run this new program. And because of the situation financially and everything, my boss says we need to bring in research funding and we need to bring in technology. So I started this job, and I came across this call right when I started working there. And this is very interesting. The ESRC, the Economic Social Research Council in the UK, has been collecting all of this social data from surveys and so forth. And now they're looking for some ways to apply this in a way to use all of this data that they have. So they partnered with Google and proposed to use, as they say, tools such as Google has, like Google Trends and Google Analytics and so forth, to take all these large data sets to inform, to support conceptual, methodological, and empirical advances, as they say, in social and economic research. So this, in a way, it's a way to take all of this big data to inform some social theory. So we applied for funding on this. We'll hear back about that any day now, actually. But our initial feedback on that was quite positive. So we'll see what happens. So then Sally tells me about this conference, this workshop, and the aim to investigate new everyday social dynamics. Well, Sally and Michael came up with this concept of PolySocial reality, and we think that qualifies as a kind of new social dynamic. And then it's about understanding social phenomena as they unfold, mining digital traces. Well, my research in trails, I'll talk to you about a bit. So, wrong arrow. No arrows are working. Okay, so I tried to explain this concept of PolySocial reality. These slides come from Sally. So in a way, I'm sort of doing her talk for her. Mobile devices obviously extend our reach. They expand our capabilities. They strengthen our existing social ties. We can ring people that we are close to. We can talk to them, interact with them from afar, from somewhere else. But it also weakens these what are called local tenuous ties. So this person working in a shop, she's on the phone, she can only give her partial attention maybe to someone who's there physically co-present with her. And when we try to interleave this digital and social, these two kinds of attention, this often fails. So what's happening that we're observing, as it's very clear, that this is driving shifts in how people behave around the world and across cultures in different societies. That people are coming more to this divided attention and this kind of individuation that I'll come on to. Young people in particular, this is from a recent study, 1/3 of people think the internet is as important as air. And I think the study says air, food, and water, and all the necessities of life. They think it's vital to have the internet with them at all the time. So what happens is when we adopt this into our lifestyle, we ourselves become a kind of persistent structure. We adapt our behavior to these devices, to these capabilities, and it changes the way that we behave in the world. We become this kind of what's called diaspora of the connected. We're all sort of spreading out individually all the time, connected to somewhere remote, but not completely physically present. And this phenomena called connected individuation. So we're the simple term from Sherry Turkle is alone together. I think this connected individuation is maybe a better term for that, where we're connected all the time, but we're kind of isolated in a way. Something like this, perhaps. This is one of Sally's slides. So, PolySocial reality attempts to explain this multi-threaded, multifaceted phenomena where we're interacting all the time with multiple identities, personalities, online in the physical world. Something like this, where it gets very complex, and that's where we're trying to bring the tools and the data and visualization to this problem. The issue here is that the technologies become multiplexed. The physical reality and the digital reality become interleaved, and as the devices multiply, we take them out into the world. So here's a more concise definition. It describes this aggregate of multiplexed, synchronous and asynchronous, individuated data creations. So asynchronous is interesting, and I'll come to that in a second, is that people are moving to more of an asynchronous communication model, even when they're talking about synchronous communications in the physical world. So the effect, it can be both positive and negative. Of course, we can be connected all the time, we can expand our networks and so forth, but then we have this phenomena of fragmentation, this multiplexing of communication, and this isolation, this individuation. So the idea is to use PolySocial reality as an analytic model focusing on the interaction of these messages. It's not intended to be a complete representation of the network of all these connections. It's meant to collectively represent individuals' interactions with each other and give us a way to investigate the processes that lead to all of this complexity. So you may be familiar with this. We all do this all the time, geolocomotion, walking down the street. You're trying to navigate. I'm coming here from the hotel. I'm trying to find this building, this room, and I'm looking on my device. And this has, of course, effects in the world. This was a project in New York where native New Yorkers, and I lived there for some time. New Yorkers like to move fast, and they're very determined, and they move down the sidewalk. And tourists, to a new city, they don't know where they're going. They stop in the middle to read a map, to look at a device, and this was frustrating to some of the local people. And they come up with this nice project, this idea. Now, politically interesting notion here is that institutions now, in a way, force us to become online, to go online, to fill out forms, to get information about governmental, social matters. Often it's cheaper or it's only available online. So this, the larger sort of political situation is that this is focused. So talk about the power going out. Well, it's going to create some larger problems than just lack of connectivity, perhaps. The other effect of PolySocial reality is that our time is compressed because we have all of this connections, this information. We're on the device all the time, as we're multitasking as well, doing different things at the same time. There's a related phenomenon called continuous partial attention, you may know. When you're sitting at your computer, maybe focusing on something, but you're keeping some bit of your attention on the message that pops up. That's your Twitter feed, your email, or something like that. Slightly different from multitasking, where you're switching between one task and another, where you're focused on one task, but you keep one bit of your attention that's on the email or something like that. And then this idea of divided attention. There's some data on this. I think it's 750 out of 1,000 people admitted to being on the phone or using a device when they're in the toilet, which is what this guy's doing here. Of course, it has more serious consequences. In the worst of cases, is that our attention is divided, and it may have fatal or worse consequences. So we adapt to this in various ways. One is that when we're simultaneously in these multiple worlds, we don't know how to interact with people who are on the phone. We're walking down the street, say, not using a device. The people using a device, I saw some interesting research about this lately, that people walking down the street looking at a phone, in a way they rule the road because they don't really have to pay attention. If you're the one who's paying attention, you have to walk around them because they don't care, they're just going to keep walking. So it's you that has to move, and in a way they're in charge of that situation. So we don't know, their roles in the community become a bit ambiguous. So then we have these multiple levels of communication. When we're sending asynchronous messages, text messages, emails, Twitter, direct messages, and so forth, we change our behavior in relation to this communication. If we don't have enough overlap in real time with these messages, you may miss some meaning that's required at a particular time, and this can disrupt cooperation in the simplest cases. And in the worst cases, missed messages. This was a case of a missed message where the bridge wasn't up in time and got smashed by this barge, for example. So the result, one result, is that our synchronous real-time conversations are becoming part of a kind of worldview that is asynchronous. We're used to with this phenomenon called a proximity. We're going to meet someone, okay, I'll meet you at EPFL at about noon. We don't set a particular time or place, we know we're both going to have a phone, and we'll just ring up and we'll find where we're going to be and exactly when. So we're adjusting our view to be kind of asynchronous. So now, coming on to where we are, the idea for us going forward is how we're going to visualize and analyze this, and I welcome your input and your ideas about this. Social network analysis, as you know, you can use a simple social graph to represent a network with unidirectional links and bidirectional links between particular nodes, which in this case represent individuals in a network. You can see the references in the paper. This is a multigraph network where the relation between two individuals, you can have multiple links between two individuals. So these two people, say, walking down the street, they both have a device with them. They might be related to each other. They might be friends with each other. They might also be there because of some event. They're going to lunch together. That's another link. They might also be linked, say, on Twitter or on Facebook. So they're linked that way too. So you can have multiple links between the nodes in a network. And then from that, links to all of the other people in that network. And you can see this gets pretty complex very quickly. Now, one approach that we came across in the literature is that you can have what's called a metagraph, which is that nodes in a network are represented as sets. So it's sets of things can become nodes. Now this is useful because we can take aggregations of particular kinds of data and link them together in different sort of levels of granularity. Now this is where my own research comes into this. I found this useful in studying contextual information with individuals and groups of people, where you could consider them to be in this kind of concentric circles of context. So they have a personal context, they have a particular experience and preferences. They're situated in a social context, we're here in this room, for example, and also in a physical context. That's the physical location. Now what I did in my research is use this to investigate trails. In this case, trails of people going through a knowledge ecology. It could be an online space, a series of browser web pages. It could be, in my case, a physical space, a museum, where they're encountering particular artifacts in the museum and they're engaging with some and not others, all within these contexts. So the idea was that you can, at each stop in the trail, you can use this model to investigate how people are making meanings from that particular object, whether it's a web page or a physical artifact, mediated by some tool in a particular context. So then applying that back to this idea of polysocial reality, we can impose these kind of contexts back onto this sort of meta multigraph where we can consider personal attributes of individual nodes in the network. We can consider sets of socially located individuals, and then we can consider physical locations as people are moving through the world. So for us, that requires collecting some quantitative data from online social networks, Twitter and so forth. But also it requires collecting some data from people in the physical world, and that's where things like ethnography come in, where we have to follow people, or we have to get them to give us their interpretations, their words, their actions, and to be able to capture that and match that up with the online quantitative data. So it's an interesting challenge. And it's really where we are. We're really just starting out with this. So I welcome anything you have to say about that. Thank you.
Questions, Kevin?
Yeah?
A very basic question on how you are developing your project is how do you define a tie or a link at all? Because you mentioned different things like having lunch together or having someone on one's address list or so in social network analysis, the first thing you would do is a network is defined by this type of relationship or one type, three types, but that would be the first thing for us to specify. Or also to see if you really need several layers of connectedness of networks, or you could just maybe take one and use multiple, like people who are in contact in different ways, would be a form of tie strength. That make it simpler. So to what extent, in fact, you really need all this complexity?
Yeah, this is what we're looking at the moment, strong ties and weak ties. In a way, the polysocial reality is intended to look at this, the state of the network and how people are connected. But as you can see, they can be connected in lots of different ways, and this doesn't say anything about the strength of the ties or anything like that. So there are all these facets. So one of the first things we'll do, I think, is take a very small case study, exactly that. I'm more interested in the meaning in the messages. I'm not so interested in the structure of the network itself or even the connections, but how people extract the meaning. So I'm interested in the human side of the nodes, how people socially collaborate and make meaning, than the structure of the network. And this is something that we're negotiating now, is how we can describe this phenomena, this theory of polysocial reality, and still say something about the individual nodes in the network. So you could imagine that it's a case study, something about some particular topic. For example, say take your riots example, where people are in a particular situation. We want to be able to look at I want to look at the content of the messages, and we need to be able to look at the network structure in a way, what you've been doing with your work, but linking that to the physical world. So I don't know. I think it's in the content of the messages from my perspective, but it could also be in the strength of the ties if we're making a larger sort of network model. So we'll start with some small case studies, I think, and keep it very simple and build the network from there, build the model.
I have a feeling that, I mean, in your first example, you showed a lot of issues which are linked in some way with phenomenologies, in the sense that I go out of the bus, I'm in a given network configuration. Then I come at home, it's yet another network configuration. And so we have the situation where we part of graphs, we leave others, and I bump into someone that it's in some way it changed. Well, it depends really at the level of temporal granularity you're looking. And I think it's related to Paola's questions. In all the graphs are highly linked with the notion of duration. Because to see with a tie, you need to average it over time. I mean, nothing is, and so you have a bit. I think with your graph approach, you have a bit two alternatives. I mean, either you feel that what is important is the average phenomena. I mean, you have a collection of people they're communicating over a given period of time, and this creates a complex graph, and this can be analysis with graph theory as such. Or you're more interested in the reconfiguration itself and not so much a static approach, and in some sense other type of tool that needs to be used is how graphs form themselves and disappear and reappearing, and it's yet another type of analysis. Is that correct?
Yes, we're interested in this last approach.
Okay.
Over time, because this says nothing about how the network is changing over time. As you say, as people are moving through the space, this network is changing. Things are coming up, things are going away, connections are made, they're broken. So we had in the original version of our paper online this diagram that shows kind of layers, which is over time, things changing, connections being made in different ways over time. I think that's exactly the way to go. And as you say, it requires different tools. It's a visualization over time. It's maybe an animated visualization or something happening in real time instead of a static graphic.
Okay. Olivier? Yes.
I would add maybe even more complexity, because you have links or a graph of potential connection which change over times. You have all this level, but also the way people are thinking, they are representing themselves, the capacity of the tools or the networks they have. I mean, and my point was beyond trails and links, virtual, all the people at different time, when they are moving, they are building their presentation of their capacity in terms of network building or moving around, how they change over time. And I was wondering how you would track that.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think maybe one of these slides shows this perhaps in some way, where they're building different kind of identities. And yeah, it's a good question. I think you can track to some extent through particular apps that people are using. They have a particular Facebook identity, maybe a Twitter identity, but you have to maybe extrapolate something, and maybe it's something that even the person themselves cannot articulate very clearly, or may not want to articulate very clearly, these different identities that they're constructing online. Anthropologists have been doing that in the real world, trying to construct people's identities or explain how people construct their identities. So maybe we can apply that in some way. Some people doing sort of digital ethnography, digital anthropology online in places like role-playing games, where it's easy in a way to show how someone is playing a different role. In a place like Facebook and Twitter and places like that, it's not so easy. So you have to really know each individual person maybe in order to do that. So I don't know, come up with some kind of metric where we can evaluate this person's digital identity with their real life identity. I don't know if it's possible or not.
One question in this respect would be, I think, important if we would like to do some modeling of these situations. We should in some moment start to think about the importance which people give to some different ties. This young mother keeping the child and doing many things to that. The importance of that could be different for these and those things, like that. Or this lady who is driving and somebody is in front of them, of her. That is important also in other cases. And that could be different models of giving importance to some part of the world. Maybe it's different generation or different segments of population for example, scientists. They cannot jump into Twitter and Facebook model of life because of in this case, they don't have time for 25 minutes to keep mind to the writing paper. In this case, yeah, that one of my colleagues told me, if you would like to write something, you must be out of line. Yeah, if you don't do that, you don't have any career scientific. Yeah, and these different models of different importance of that different times ties could be important. Do you have some model how to cope with that?
Well, I know many scientists actually who are in fact writing in this way where they're always still connected and using this kind of divided attention and still looking at Twitter and things like that. It's a phenomenon we have to if not embrace, at least understand. So yeah, I don't know. I don't have a model for explaining this exactly, but I think the case, it will be choosing a very narrow and contained case study. Maybe it's a scientific community or something like that to investigate this. Because in some situations where it's difficult to, there's some that are easier to study than others. But we're interested in this overlap where we want to study the physical world and people that are using the digital embedded in the physical world. I'll tell you another example that came to mind. I did a residency in an art gallery recently as a kind of technologist in residence. And the people who worked in the gallery were asking me, well, what's the answer? I have too much email coming in and I can't manage my time properly. Is there some answer from technology that can help me? And actually, one answer was found right in their own building where they had artist studios. And artists sometimes do exactly what you said, where they don't answer email, they don't answer the phone, they shut everything off and they focus on creating a work for 2 hours, 3 days, 2 weeks, and they focus only on that. That was quite interesting. So it's a practice that more people are adopting, this kind of email embargo or email holiday. I'm not going to look at my device all weekend except for maybe Sunday night I'll check my email, and then you have 400 emails to look through. So that's a related phenomenon that maybe needs investigating. I don't know if it's part of this, but certainly it's related to this.